It was early morning, and the sun had not yet risen fully. A faint light touched the old cement floor as Grace swept gently with a short broom. Her wrapper was tied firmly around her chest, and her feet were bare on the cold ground. The harmattan breeze touched her skin, but she didn't stop sweeping. This was her daily life. Before the birds began to sing and before anyone else in the house opened their eyes, Grace had already started working. She swept the compound, fetched water from the tap behind the building, and washed the dishes from the night before. Sometimes, she hadn't even eaten anything herself. Daniel's family house was large but old. It stood in the middle of a quiet street, painted in peeling cream and green, 4 rooms, 1 parlor, a small kitchen, and a corridor where chairs and basins stayed scattered. Daniel, her husband, lived there with his mother, his 2 sisters, and Grace. From the very first day Grace entered that house, she had known she was not welcome. Daniel's mother looked at her with cold eyes. His sisters whispered and laughed whenever she passed. And Daniel, he had changed. The man who once held her hands and promised to protect her now barely noticed her. She had become a stranger in her own marriage. Grace, his mother had said one morning, standing in the middle of the kitchen, "You must think we're fools, sitting here doing nothing while you laze around like a queen." Grace had been bending by the pot, her hands covered in gary flour. She looked up slowly. "Mama, I've been cooking since 5 o'clock, she said quietly. "The soup is almost ready." "Don't talk back at me." Mama snapped. "Useless girl. Just because my son married you doesn't mean you're anything." Grace said nothing. She simply lowered her head and continued stirring the pot. Later that day, she washed clothes, 3 buckets full. 1 for Daniel's clothes, 1 for Mama's, and the last one for the sisters. Her back ached, but no one offered to help. The girls sat on the corridor, scrolling through their phones and laughing loudly. Grace watched them from the corner of her eye and continued scrubbing. They never saw her pain. They never cared. Daniel came home in the evening, entered the house without a word, and didn't ask if she had eaten. He dropped his phone, changed his clothes, and went out again. Grace stood at the doorway, watching him walk away. She didn't cry. She had cried too much in the past, and the tears had stopped answering her. As she returned inside to continue cleaning, her heart whispered one question: how did I end up here? But the answer never came. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice said, this was only the beginning. Grace sat quietly on the small mat by the corner of the room. The light bulb above her head flickered. The air inside was hot and heavy, filled with the smell of palm oil and soap. Her 2 daughters, Laura and Temmie, lay on the mattress, sleeping peacefully. Their little hands clutched the edge of Grace's old wrapper. She stared at them for a moment, the pain in her heart softening. They were the only reason she was still standing, the only light in a dark place. But even they were not spared. Daniel's mother often called them names. Girls. Only girls, she would say, clapping her hands in mock disappointment, as if they were worthless. One afternoon, when Grace went to pick Laura up from school, the teacher pulled her aside. "Madam Grace," she said gently, "is everything okay at home?" Laura told a classmate that her grandmother called her a mistake. Grace's throat tightened. She forced a smile and said Laura must have misunderstood something. But deep down, she knew Laura had heard right. The words were real. The pain was real. Back at home, Grace did everything. She cleaned the toilets. She scrubbed the floors. She served everyone food, sometimes without eating herself. And when her daughters asked why Auntie Beezy never helped, she would tell them, she's busy. Even when they saw Beezy lying on the chair, pressing her phone all day. Daniel never asked how she was coping. He never once said thank you. He hardly stayed at home. When he came in, he brought friends, sometimes women. He laughed loudly in the parlor while Grace stayed in the kitchen with tears in her eyes and fire in her hands. The day she tried to talk to him, he stared at her like a stranger. "What do you want me to do?" he asked coldly. "I just want a little respect," she whispered. "I want peace in this house." Daniel chuckled and picked his car keys. "You're lucky I married you. I don't owe you anything." His words stabbed her. That night, she lay beside him on the same bed, but it felt like 100 miles separated them. He turned his back to her and slept like nothing mattered. Grace stared at the ceiling, wide awake, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. Each tick reminded her that time was passing, but her pain remained. Every day felt the same, like walking through fire barefooted, smiling so no one would see the scars. The neighbors saw her and shook their heads. "That woman has suffered," one of them whispered to another. If she had brothers, would she be living like this? But Grace never explained herself. She never told anyone about the estate company registered in her name, about the lands in her file cabinet, about the luxury cars hidden in another city. She wore plain clothes, walked humbly, and kept her head down. She had chosen this life because she wanted to be loved for who she was. But now, she was beginning to wonder if she had made a mistake, a very big mistake. The sky was dark that evening. The wind carried the scent of rain, and the compound looked quiet, almost too quiet. Grace stood beside the washing line, pinning the last of the children's clothes with her trembling fingers. Her back ached. Her stomach grumbled. She hadn't eaten since morning. From the parlor, she could hear laughter. Beezy and Ada were watching a movie. The generator hummed. Daniel was out again. It had become a routine she never got used to. As she packed the empty basin, she turned and saw Jude, the gatekeeper, standing at the corner. He quickly looked away, but she had already seen the concern in his eyes. Jude had worked with the family for years. He was quiet, respectful, and did his job well. But in recent months, Grace noticed the way he looked at her, not with desire or pity, but with silent respect. She gave a small nod. He nodded back and returned to the gate. That was how their friendship began, with silence. Later that week, as Grace returned from the market carrying heavy nylon bags, it began to rain suddenly. The load was heavy, and her wrapper was already soaked. She struggled through the compound gate, her legs slipping on the wet floor. Daniel's sister sat inside, watching her through the window and laughing. "Mama's girl has turned to donkey," Beezy muttered. Grace said nothing. Then she saw Jude rushing toward her. He took the bags from her hands quickly and walked beside her under the rain. "Let me help you," he said softly. "Thank you," she whispered. That day, he waited near the kitchen door after she had dropped the goods. "Madam Grace," he said gently, "you're too strong." She looked at him, surprised. "No woman should be carrying all this pain alone," he added. Grace felt a lump rise in her throat. She quickly looked away. From that day forward, Jude would often help her carry loads or fetch water when the tap was dry. When her daughters were playing in the compound, he would watch them with soft eyes and give them sweets when no one was looking. It wasn't long before Grace began to look forward to his presence. His voice became a kind of comfort in the storm. He never crossed boundaries. He never spoke too much. But his presence alone was a reminder that kindness still existed. One evening, as she sat outside under the mango tree after another long day, Jude walked up to her. "You don't deserve this life," he said. Grace looked at him. "But this is the life I chose." "No," he said calmly. "You chose love. But love didn't choose you." Her chest tightened. He stood for a moment, then walked away. Grace sat there in silence, staring at the sky. The stars were few, and the clouds were thick. But in that quiet, she felt something shift inside her, something small, something new. The sky cracked with thunder. Rain fell like heavy stones on the roof. Inside the small kitchen, Grace stood barefoot, stirring a pot of soup with one hand and wiping her eyes with the other. Lara and Temmie were in the corner, huddled together on a stool, their eyes wide with fear. It was one of those nights again. Daniel had not returned home early, and that usually meant one thing: he was with another woman. Grace didn't bother calling him anymore. She had learned not to ask questions. Questions brought insults. Questions brought slaps. But deep in her chest, her heart still longed for something, a word, a glance, a sign that he still remembered the woman he once loved. A knock came at the gate. The girls jumped. Grace wiped her hands and rushed to open the door. It was Daniel, drunk, and beside him was a woman, tall, loud, with makeup smeared by the rain. They laughed as they staggered into the compound, ignoring Grace as they passed. The woman held on to Daniel like a trophy. Grace stood in the rain, frozen. Her daughters watched from the doorway, confused. She followed them into the parlor. "Daniel," she said softly, "not in front of the children, please." He turned and faced her. "Who are you to tell me what to do in my house?" His mother came out from her room. "What is going on here?" she asked, tying her wrapper around her chest. Grace pointed at the woman. "This is wrong, Mama. I've endured enough." "Enough?" Mama shouted. "You've endured enough? We're the ones enduring you." Beezy and Ada joined. "You think you have power now because Jude is fetching water for you?" Grace's heart dropped. "What are you saying?" she asked. Beezy stepped forward. "You and that gate man, don't think we don't see you whispering like lovebirds, disgracing our family." Grace's lips trembled. "That's not true." Daniel threw his bag on the ground. "I'm tired of this woman," he barked. "She has nothing to offer, no son, no name, no respect." Grace's knees weakened. Lara and Temmie ran to her, crying. "Mama," they screamed, hugging her legs. Then the words came, words that would change everything. "Get out of my house!" Daniel shouted. "Now!" Grace stared at him, stunned. "Mama, say something," she begged. Mama folded her arms. "He's the head of the house. If he says go, then go." The children wailed. Grace gathered them in her arms, shaking with fear and cold. She stepped outside into the rain, no slippers, no bag, no umbrella. Just pain. The gate was locked. She knocked weakly. "Jude." It was only a whisper, but he heard. He opened the gate, shocked to see her like that. "Madam Grace, what happened?" She didn't answer. He looked at the crying children and stepped aside. "Come in," he said, leading them into his small room. He gave them dry clothes. He lit a small lamp. He made hot tea. And that night, Grace cried like never before, but not just from pain. From the kindness she never knew she needed. The room was small, barely enough to hold a bed and a stool. Yet, to Grace and her daughters, it felt like shelter, a safe place, even if just for a moment. Jude gave them space. He didn't ask questions. He didn't stare too long. He simply brought a blanket, folded it neatly, and placed it at the edge of the bed. Lara and Temmie slept close to their mother, their tiny fingers curled tightly into her wrapper. The room was quiet, save for the soft hiss of rain outside and the occasional thunder rumbling in the distance. Grace sat up, watching them sleep. Her eyes were dry now. The tears had finished. But the pain remained, deep, settled, heavy in her chest. Everything she had tried to build with love had scattered like ashes. She remembered the day she first met Daniel. He was gentle then, or maybe she had just wanted to see only the good in him. He had called her special. He had said she was lucky he saw something in her. At the time, she smiled and believed it. Now, she knew he didn't see her. He saw someone to control. Grace wrapped the blanket tighter around her girls and looked around the room. There were no fancy decorations, no air conditioner, no soft lights. But there was peace, quiet, honest peace. Jude returned with a tray. On it was a bowl of warm yam porridge and 2 spoons. "You should eat," he said gently, placing it on the stool. Grace shook her head slowly. "For them," he said, glancing at the children. She nodded and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't speak again. Just gave her one small nod and returned to sit outside under the little canopy near the gate. He stayed there all night, guarding them. The next day, Grace woke up to the sound of a rooster crowing. Her body ached, but there was a strange calm inside her. She stood up quietly, so as not to wake Laura and Temmie, and stepped outside. Jude was still sitting at his post, his eyes half closed from sleep. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned and smiled gently. "Good morning, madam." She looked at him. His eyes were red. He had barely slept. "You didn't have to stay up," she said. "I couldn't sleep knowing you were out here like that." She looked away, her throat tight. That morning, she washed her daughter's clothes and helped Jude sweep the front of the compound. She didn't complain. She didn't explain. She just worked quietly. People who passed by stared. Some whispered. But Grace didn't care anymore. Her home had rejected her. Her husband had betrayed her. But in the middle of the storm, someone had opened a door, offered a dry blanket, a bowl of food, and respect. And somehow, that mattered more than everything she had lost. It wasn't love. But it was something real. The sun was high that afternoon. The compound buzzed with noise. Daniel's family sat under the mango tree, chewing roasted corn and talking loudly. Daniel's new woman, Rita, was there too, sitting proudly like she owned the place. She wore a short red gown, gold slippers, and heavy makeup. Her laughter echoed across the walls. Grace watched quietly from behind the gate. She had come to pick a few things she had left behind. The children needed clothes. She hadn't returned since that rainy night they threw her out. But she wasn't prepared for what was waiting. As soon as she stepped in, Beezy saw her. "Look who we have here," she said, standing up. "The runaway maid." Daniel's mother looked up, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" she asked harshly. "I just came to pick some of the girls' clothes," Grace said calmly. "They've been wearing the same thing since that night." Daniel stepped out from the house, holding Rita's hand. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I didn't come for trouble," Grace replied. "Just a few things." Ada stood and pointed at her. "Is it because you've been sleeping with the gate man you're brave to show your face?" Grace froze. "What did you say?" she asked quietly. "Don't pretend." Beezy shouted. "The whole street is talking. You now live with Jude. You think we're fools." Daniel scoffed. "No wonder you were always defending him." Grace's heart pounded. Her mouth was dry. "That's not true," she said. "Jude only helped me when all of you turned your backs." Rita rolled her eyes. What kind of woman moves into the gate man's room with her daughters? Cheap. Grace felt her knees weaken, but she stood straight. "Say whatever you like, but don't lie against a good man." Mama stood up slowly. "Grace, don't come back to this house again. Daniel has moved on. He has a real woman now." Daniel nodded. "You and your bastards should stay where you belong." Grace's mouth trembled. "They are your children." "Not anymore," he said coldly. "Rita is pregnant. We have no space for you." The words hit her like a brick. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Laura and Temmie were behind the gate, watching. Grace looked at them, then back at the people who once called her family. "I don't want your house," she said softly. "And I don't need your name." She turned around slowly. And as she walked away, she didn't cry. Not this time. Jude was waiting by the corner. He had seen everything. He didn't speak. He simply opened the gate and let her in. The children ran to her. She held them tightly. That night, as the sky turned orange and the crickets began to sing, Grace sat quietly outside with Jude. The pain was still fresh, but her silence was no longer from fear. It was strength. Because deep inside her, something was rising, a voice that said, "They will regret this." It was a bright afternoon. The compound was quiet, almost too quiet. Daniel was sitting under the mango tree with his new wife, Rita. His mother sat nearby, fanning herself with an old magazine. Beezy and Ada were peeling oranges, laughing and gossiping about her neighbors, a daughter who had just given birth. Everything looked peaceful. But deep down, things were not as rosy as they seemed. Rita's pregnancy was beginning to wear everyone out. She complained about everything. She refused to cook. Refused to clean. Daniel's sisters didn't like her anymore, but they couldn't say it out loud. His mother had begun to sigh often. Things were not going as planned. Daniel had lost his job a few weeks earlier, a misunderstanding with his manager. Since then, money had stopped flowing. Rita had started calling her friends for small loans. Beezy had resumed her petty trading business. Even Mama began to ask for support from relatives. But they never spoke about Grace. To them, she no longer existed. Until that day. A black SUV drove slowly into the compound. It was big, shiny, and spotless. The engine purred gently before it went off. The door opened, and a man in a black suit stepped out. He looked around, nodded politely, and opened the back door. Daniel stood up. Beezy stopped peeling oranges. Rita adjusted her gown. Then she stepped out. Grace. But not the Grace they remembered. She wore a sleek gold gown that shimmered under the sun. Her hair was neatly packed. Her makeup was soft and elegant. On her wrist was a shining silver watch. Her heels clicked gently against the cement floor as she walked. The compound fell silent. No one moved. Daniel blinked. Grace? She smiled softly. Hello, Daniel. His mother stood up slowly, shocked. Is it really you? Grace nodded. Yes, Mama. It's me. Rita stepped back, confused. I thought you said she was poor. Grace's smile widened, but her eyes held no joy. Poor. That's what you were told. Daniel looked around. What? What's going on here? Another car pulled into the compound. Then another. Security men in suits stepped out and opened the doors for two women and a young man. They all came and stood behind Grace. The silence grew louder. Grace turned to face them all. I didn't come here to fight, she said calmly. I just came to tell you thank you. Thank you. Ada echoed. For what? For showing me who you really were, Grace replied. Daniel stepped closer. Grace, I don't understand. I know, she said. You never did. Then she turned to Lara and Temmie, who stepped out from the car behind her. They were dressed beautifully in white gowns, their faces bright with joy. Grace looked at Jude, who stood near the gate in his clean uniform, watching everything from a distance. She smiled at him. Then she turned back to Daniel and his family. I have forgiven you all, she said quietly. But I will never forget. And with that, she walked back to her car. The gate opened, and Grace left them standing in silence. The compound remained silent long after the cars left. Daniel stood frozen, his hands trembling slightly. Sweat gathered on his forehead, not from heat, but from the heavy weight of shame. His mother sat slowly on the bench, her mouth still open. Beezy and Ada couldn't speak. Even Rita had disappeared into the room. No one saw it coming. No one imagined the woman they mocked, insulted, and threw away like trash was someone of such power and dignity, a billionaire. Grace. The same Grace who once begged them for respect. That evening, news began to spread around the street. Children ran from one compound to another, shouting, "Grace came back in a big car. She's rich. She's the owner of golden estates." Traders at the junction paused their business to discuss it. Tailors, hairdressers, and even the barber stopped to ask questions. Is it true? She's the one behind the big estate near Diamond Avenue. No wonder she always kept quiet. Inside Daniel's house, regret filled the air. Daniel paced the room like a madman. How? How could she be all that and never say a word? Beezy wiped her tears. She washed our clothes and cooked for us. Daniel's mother groaned. And I called her a mistake. But it was too late. That night, Grace sat in her mansion, far away, surrounded by peace. Lara and Temmie were watching a movie in the family room. Jude was now her estate manager, well-dressed, well-spoken, and respected by all the staff. He had stayed loyal even when she had nothing. He treated her like gold. Grace stood at the balcony, looking at the stars. For a long time, she had wanted love, genuine love. That was why she had hidden her wealth. She had entered a marriage hoping to be valued for who she was. But what she received was humiliation. Still, she had gained something greater: wisdom, strength, peace, and a man who saw her worth not because of what she had, but because of who she was. Jude joined her on the balcony, a gentle breeze brushing his shirt. "They will come," he said quietly. Grace nodded. "Let them. They'll meet the gate." And they did. 2 days later, Daniel's mother arrived at the gate with Daniel and Beezy. They didn't come with insults this time. They came with tears and long faces. "Please," Mama said, knocking. "We didn't know. Forgive us.